Hackman's back in New Jersey. Gene Hackman spent decades building one of the most respected careers in Hollywood, and quietly, one of its most mysterious fortunes. But when he passed, what surfaced wasn't just a number, it was something else, something his family never expected. What happened to the $80 million legacy he left behind? And what could have driven a man like Gene Hackman to make such deliberate, unsettling choices? Before we continue, let us know, where are you watching from? Gene Hackman was not born into comfort or recognition. His story didn't begin with promise. It began with disarray. Born in 1930 in San Bernardino, California, Hackman came into the world as the Great Depression still gripped the nation. From the very start, life demanded resilience from him. His childhood was anything but warm. It was fractured, cold, often unkind, and as he would later recall, the pain of those early years never truly left him. His family, like many during that era, struggled, but theirs was not just financial hardship. It was emotional distance, instability, and a painful absence of belonging. His father, a newspaper press operator, was distant and unpredictable. When Gene was only 13, his father left, vanished without warning or explanation. It was a moment that would scar him permanently. He walked out and didn't come back, Hackman would recall in an old interview. It was a departure that felt cruel beyond words. A boy, barely a teenager, forced to carry the weight of abandonment for the rest of his life. Without a father figure and with a mother overwhelmed by the burden of survival, Gene found himself drifting through his teenage years, unsupported, unseen. School was not a sanctuary, but a daily reminder of his difference. He was tall, awkward, and wore a heavy seriousness in his eyes that set him apart from other boys. Teachers labeled him difficult. Classmates ignored him. He became invisible, not by choice, but by neglect. And in that invisibility, a deep ache took root. By 16, he dropped out of high school, not to chase a dream, but to escape a reality that offered no hope. With nowhere else to turn, he joined the United States Marine Corps by lying about his age. It was at the time the only structure he could cling to, but the rigid order of the military didn't erase the hurt. It only taught him how to bury it, in silence, in obedience. The discipline he learned became his armor. But behind that armor, the lonely child still whispered, waiting for someone to notice. After serving in China and the Pacific, Hackman returned to the United States and drifted from job to job. A truck driver, a furniture mover, a doorman. Each role was as anonymous as the last. Each paycheck, a reminder that he was just passing through life. Unremarkable, unimportant. He would later say that during those years, the most painful part wasn't poverty, but the quiet humiliation of feeling invisible. It's truly heartbreaking to imagine a man who would one day win 2 Oscars, feeling like he didn't matter at all. In his late 20s, Hackman finally made a desperate decision to pursue acting. It wasn't glamorous, it was survival. He enrolled in acting classes in Pasadena and later in New York. But even in this new world, he was met with rejection. Brutal, repeated rejection. One teacher told him plainly, "You'll never make it. You don't have the face or the charm." It was a remark that stung not because it was new, but because it echoed every message he had heard growing up. But he stayed. He persisted. Not because he was fearless, but because turning back meant accepting that the world had been right about him all along. And perhaps more than fame, more than money, Hackman was chasing something deeper. A place where he would finally be seen. Looking back, his early life wasn't simply difficult. It was tragic in its silence. It was filled with moments of emotional poverty no paycheck could fix. It's a sobering reminder that some of the greatest talents are shaped not by inspiration, but by survival. Not by praise, but by the hunger for it. It is truly sad, deeply human, and unforgettably painful to know that for many years, Gene Hackman didn't feel like he belonged anywhere. Not in his family, not in his school, not even in the world. He would carry that wound quietly through success and stardom. And while the world saw a strong, composed man on screen, very few knew of the boy inside, one who had once waited for a father who never came back. That is the kind of pain that doesn't fade with applause. It's the kind of sorrow that success cannot erase. And perhaps it's also the kind of memory that shaped every choice he made, even at the very end. About 2 seconds to get the sheriff out of here, I'm going to kick the goddamn door. Gene Hackman's rise to Hollywood royalty was anything but smooth. After a bruising childhood and years of emotional isolation, he entered the world of acting not through ambition, but through desperation. He had nothing left to lose. With rejection already etched into the fabric of his life, every failed audition was just another familiar sting, but one he had long since learned to endure. In the 1960s, Hackman began landing small roles in television and minor films. He was 37 when his breakout came. A performance in Bonnie and Clyde, 1967, that stunned critics. Finally, someone saw what Gene had hidden for so long: intensity, precision, and a presence that demanded attention without ever asking for it. It was a performance born not of charm, but of raw, buried pain, and that's why it resonated. From there, Hackman ascended. The French Connection, 1971, cemented him as a leading man. His portrayal of Detective Popeye Doyle was not just award-winning, it was iconic. He didn't play heroes or villains. He played men. Complicated, broken, believable men. That became his signature, and perhaps it's because he understood those roles not as characters, but as mirrors. Every line, every glance carried the weight of a man who had spent years hiding behind silence. His success wasn't just talent, it was endurance. Hackman worked relentlessly, starring in films like The Conversation, 1974, Superman, 1978, and Hoosiers, 1986. He could be cold, fierce, or vulnerable, often all three in a single scene. But behind the camera, he remained guarded. Interviews were rare. Praise seemed to make him uncomfortable. He wasn't chasing celebrity, he was surviving it. In 1992, he won his second Oscar for Unforgiven, a film that ironically was about reckoning with the past. Then he saw it as a career peak. For Hackman, it may have been a quiet confession. He was aging, slowing down, but never softening. Directors described him as disciplined to the point of obsession. Crew members noted he rarely lingered on set. He came in, delivered, and disappeared. No drama, no indulgence, just work. By the early 2000s, he began to withdraw. Under Welcome to Mooseport, 2004, Hackman walked away from acting altogether. There was no farewell tour, no final interview. He vanished with the same quiet resolve that had carried him through life. And to this day, no one fully understands why. Some say it was health. Others say it was disillusionment. But perhaps more truthfully, Hackman had said everything he needed to say, on screen, in silence, through characters who spoke the words he never could. His career wasn't just a journey through film. It was a masked memoir, a legacy not of fame, but of endurance. And that, in itself, is extraordinary. They all flew home to their castles and their private jets, remember? Behind that legacy was a twilight chapter few could have imagined, and even fewer were prepared to face. In his final years, Hackman retreated deeper into seclusion. The world, for the most part, had forgotten him. And perhaps, heartbreakingly, that's exactly how he wanted it. He stopped appearing in public. No interviews, no photographs, just long, quiet days in his modest New Mexico home. A place surrounded by pine trees and silence. Whispers of his declining health began to surface. A fall here, a cancelled appearance there. But no official statements were ever made. Even those close to him knew little. He lived in almost complete solitude, his phone rarely ringing, his door rarely knocked. It was as though the man who once commanded the screen had quietly erased himself from the world. He was seen occasionally by neighbors, riding his bike slowly through town, hunched with age, almost unrecognizable. A cashier at a local grocery store once said he looked like someone who had lived through too much. Those brief glimpses only deepened the mystery. How could someone once so alive appear so ghost-like? And then one morning, the news broke. Gene Hackman had passed away. No cameras, no vigil, no family statement, just a quiet headline in a local paper. The world was stunned. How could a man so beloved, so wealthy, so respected, just vanish into the night? The question that echoed through every headline and every home was chilling in its simplicity. How could a man with over $80 million in wealth have no one watching over him? No nurse, no caregiver, no family member at his bedside. He died alone, not in a hospital bed surrounded by loved ones, not in the arms of those he raised or embraced through life, but in the dim stillness of an empty house, with no hand to hold, no final word spoken. It was by all accounts a profoundly heartbreaking ending for a man who gave so much to the world, but seemingly received so little in return at the end. Some called it his choice, that solitude was his comfort, that he preferred silence to superficiality. But others saw it differently. Was it really a choice? Or had the years of emotional distance, of unhealed wounds, left him incapable of letting anyone truly close? Letters never sent. Phone calls never returned. Family members unsure whether they were even welcome. Friends who said, "I hadn't heard from him in years." It painted a picture, not of peace, but of quiet sorrow. A man locked behind walls, he built not to keep the world out, but perhaps to keep his pain in. There were no public services, no tributes read aloud, just silence. And in that silence, the weight of a tragedy too immense to fully articulate. A man with the world at his feet and no one beside his bed. As reporters searched for more, they found only fragments, a few neighbors who said he kept to himself, a mailman who delivered letters he never answered, and an aide who once helped him file taxes, but hadn't seen him in over a year. It was not just a lonely death. It was a devastating reminder of what happens when a lifetime of distance becomes permanent. There were signs if only someone had been looking. A back porch light left on all night, stacks of unopened mail by the door, a once meticulously kept garden, now overtaken by weeds. Signs of a man slowly slipping away, not just physically, but emotionally. He wasn't just vanishing from the world. He was letting go, piece by piece. Old friends later admitted they had thought of calling, but didn't. He wouldn't have picked up anyway, one said. Readers sent holiday cards, never knowing if they were read. What haunted them most was the not knowing if he needed them, not knowing if he wanted to be found. Hackman, once known for his voice, now had none. The actor who delivered some of cinema's most unforgettable lines exited life in total silence. It is profoundly tragic to imagine that a man so masterful in giving voice to others had none left for himself. Some believe his isolation was an act of penance, that perhaps he withdrew not out of preference, but guilt, for missed birthdays, for distant relationships, for being the kind of father and husband who was always half present. If true, that sorrow lived with him in every quiet step across those creaking wooden floors. A hospice worker who spoke anonymously shared a chilling detail. Hackman's final weeks were spent in near-total darkness, the curtains drawn, the television often left off. No music, no sound, just the occasional hum of the fridge and the wind brushing the windows. It was not a home, it was a shell. When news of his death spread, Tributes poured in from fans, critics, and fellow actors. But those closest to him, his children, his wife, his few remaining confidants, offered no public words. Some believed they were too shocked, others thought they were too hurt. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was nothing left to say. And for those who wondered about his wife, Betsy Arakawa, she had quietly passed just 2 years earlier after a brief illness. Her death, like his, was barely publicized, and with her absence, the last thread tying Hackman to warmth and companionship was cut. He had become, in every sense of the word, untethered. The scene at his home was haunting. Authorities were called only after a neighbor noticed newspapers piling up outside. When officers entered, they were met with silence and the heavy stillness that fills a place untouched for days. A half-eaten meal remained on the kitchen counter. A framed photograph of Betsy, dusty but untouched, sat beside an empty chair. The TV was on, frozen on a paused black-and-white western. It felt like walking into a memory that refused to let go. Reporters speculated about what really happened in those final hours. Did he call for help? Did he know it was coming? Was he at peace? Or did regret rush in with his final breaths? No one knew, and the will, when opened, offered no closure, only instructions, precise and cold, for how to dismantle his estate without ceremony. In the final accounting, Hackman's life was filled with contradictions, admired by millions, yet deeply private, fiercely independent, yet painfully alone, rich beyond measure, yet seemingly untouched by comfort. And so, the final tragedy, that a man who left the world with $80 million could not buy what he needed most, a hand to hold as the darkness came. We worked on in practice, all right? I want to see it on the car. When his will was finally made public, it raised more questions than it answered. Despite Hackman's immense wealth, the document was stunningly brief. It contained no dedications, no messages of love or farewell, only clinical instructions for the distribution of his estate. What shocked many was the near-total absence of his children's names. There were no detailed provisions for them, no personal messages, no clear tokens of reconciliation. Instead, the will referred repeatedly to a private trust, known only to a few advisors. The press was quick to uncover that Hackman had been meticulously transferring assets into offshore accounts and shell companies over the previous 2 decades, a structure that made tracing ownership difficult. Some properties were listed under obscure holding groups, others, like a coastal villa in Hawaii or a flat in Paris, hadn't even been known to his closest confidants. There were whispers that even Betsy hadn't known the full extent of his fortune. Perhaps most mystifying was the appearance of a foundation, the G.H. Legacy Fund, established just 3 years before his death. Though its mission statement was vague, millions had already been moved into its accounts. Its board included no family members. Instead, it listed former assistants, an old acting coach, and a nurse who had once cared for him briefly. For the family, the reading of the will was not a moment of closure. It was a wound reopened. His children sat in silence as the lawyer read the final lines. Some wept, others stared blankly. One reportedly left the room before the reading concluded. To the public, Hackman's wealth was a symbol of success. To his family, it became a symbol of distance, where we were just at it all the time. And yet, despite the mystery, despite the pain, there remains a truth no amount of silence could erase. Gene Hackman lived and left on his own terms. He was never one to explain himself, never one to play by the rules of celebrity. Even in death, he defied expectation. With grandeur, not with tribute, but with solitude, calculation, and a haunting absence of sentiment. It was not the ending anyone imagined for a man of his stature, but perhaps, in some unspoken way, it was the only ending he would have accepted. To those who knew only the actor, he will forever be Popeye Doyle, Lex Luthor, or the iron-willed coach in Hoosiers. But beyond those characters was a man full of complexity, brilliant, private, and undeniably flawed. A man who shaped generations of storytelling, even as he struggled to write the closing chapter of his own. Was he right to choose isolation? Was he at peace when the final curtain fell? We may never know, but what we can say is this. Gene Hackman's life was not only about the films he made or the accolades he received. It was about the choices he made when the lights went out. That is why he remains one of the most quietly revered legends in Hollywood history. A man whose legacy, like his performances, will continue to provoke, to inspire, and to haunt. What are your thoughts on the fact that Gene Hackman left behind no mention of his children or loved ones in his will? Why do you think in his final years no one was there to care for him? Share your reflections below. This is a story that deserves to be felt, not just remembered. Music.